And with that, I'm going to hand the microphone over to my friend Bob Wood, and we're going to learn about Eco City Alexandria. Thank you so much.
Let's hear it. Thank you. Michael, thanks. Let me make sure. Hello? Who knows how this is going to work? Hello. We are indeed glad you're with us tonight. It's the day after Easter. It's the last day of spring break for the students. So we're really, there's some crying going on over at TC Williams here. But we thank them especially for being here tonight. It is recorded and it's on YouTube, so I think the program will reflect certainly the quality of this wonderful panel as well as the questions that you'll ask. And you can play it back to your neighbors or really advertise the fact that, once again, Agenda Alexandria is putting, I think, quality issues and quality content out into the public space. You know, our motto is discuss the issues without taking sides. And I think that's an incredible, seems to be an enduring need. And we're very happy to do that about the environment today. Happy you're with us today as well. It is April 22nd after all, and that is Earth Day. Earth Day, which started back in 1970 and is been going on strong since then. So we thought it would be an appropriate time to do that. Earth Day started because of the oil spill that was off of Santa Barbara. That's where it first began. And it was an idea that Senator Gaylord Nelson brought forward after a number of UN actions. And now it's in 193 countries. And it really focuses on this sustainability of our environment. And so we're glad to do today, I think, an appropriate notice of that event and of that cause, and frankly with a panel that I think you'll find incredibly impressive. The first celebration was done at the high school and at the college level, so Ken, I'm glad to see our T.C. Williams Sr. here is sure picking up that mantle. And you'll hear more from Ken in a minute. But frankly, I think they closed Fifth Avenue that first year, and someone named Mayor Lindsay, remember him? He opened up Central Park for a celebration of Earth Day. And who knew what was going to come of that, although we found that the environment still needed our care and attention and has continued to do that and grow in that need. So happy to do that. Thankful for you being here. I would mention that Ellen Edgerton is in the back. She has a variety of products. Ellen, stand up. Ellen is a resource from the city that has really her touch on every aspect of the environmental programs. She has a table back there with every handout you could ever want, and she has some strange sensor that allows you to determine where the heat is leaking from your room. Well, it's coming in right now, but it'll show you that. Thank you, Ellen, for being here. I should say I'm assisted in putting this program together. Terry is not here yet, I don't think. All right, where? Okay, and you can turn the computer on as soon as you got your plate, okay? But we are happy to have a team. Eileen Ahern is also here. Where are you, Eileen? Thank you very much for your help and support. Frankly, my conscience in this, she was forever reminding me of things I'd forgotten, and I'm glad that I had that able assistance. So we put a program together right now that is really going to talk about a report card for Eco City. Eco City is a program that started back in 2009, and it's really built momentum within the city. And you'll meet some of the leaders already on the stage, but also in the audience who are involved in that program, Eco City or Eco City Alexandria. And you know, they can't get everything done immediately, and there might be one or two people that think they haven't done everything right. Could that be? Who knows? But I can tell you that the sincere effort, you go on the website to Eco City Alexandria, and you look at the amount of work that's gone on since 2007. And the amount of focus. I'm a strategic planner, and I can tell you when you look at the kind of purpose, goals, objectives, short and midterm objectives, the way they've structured this program and involved the city and the community, you have to give them great credit. I mean, you can give them a B+ or an A- or dare say something less than A-, but I can tell you that the program is put together extremely well as a program that's trying to move people from cause to action, actions to outcomes. And I would, as a report card goes, I would start by saying they are in the game for good, and they've been in it for good for a while and done, I think, great good for the city. You'll hear more about that in a minute. Progress, really, we're going to talk about where we are, and you'll see in some slides that are coming up in a bit, updates and plans. And I know we'll hear issues because your questions are extremely important for this. On the tables, you'll see a pad of sticky notes. write a question, and my able assistant, Eileen, will be around to pick them up, and one or two of the other board members. By the way, board members, raise your hand. I won't have you drop your fork. Raise your hand. Frank, raise your hand. Everybody, all right. Friends. All right, our board, this is an activist organization that, and Terry, I'm going to have to give you my password so you can open. I know, you're looking frantic down here. We'll take a pause to do that. But thank you to the board members for helping us provide this program as we have the programs throughout the year. We're in a cycle right now of picking new program topics. So something that maybe, you need to see discussed or would recommend we discuss, we are avidly looking forward to taking that, considering that in our summer offsite, and determining how best to structure programs. There are 8 programs, is that right, Donna? 8? 8 programs throughout the year. We've already, we were going to try to wait for scooters, but we just can't wait for that topic. And so we have 8 more topics that we'd like to do on things that are of interest to you. And so know that we'll take the comments from you and the questions as well. My job is to moderate to a degree, but kind of turn this panel loose about subjects they want to talk about, and then take your questions and feed it back into the expertise up here. I think first and foremost, we have to understand what eco-city means. What is an eco-city? And I didn't see this on a slide, so I have to quote it myself. Places where people can live healthier and economically productive lives while reducing their impact on the environment. Healthy and productive lives while reducing their impact on the environment. It did start in 2007. You'll hear more about that in a moment. Through a collaborative process throughout the city, involvement of a variety of meetings and summits that the citizens came together and talked about the objectives that they'd like the city pursue. It came out with an Eco-City Charter. And that charter really set the goals and objectives and set the path, frankly, for what now the Eco-City Plan, the ECP, the Environmental Action Plan, EAP, I should say, was approved in 2009. So you had it in 7. I'll talk about the genesis of it a bit, and Mr. Skrayback can do that for us. Bill was there when, how it started, where it's proceeded, and how far we've gotten. It's overseen by the Alexandria Environmental Policy Commission, by the way. There's a citizen and city organization that oversees the progress of this environmental action plan. And that was impaneled in 2009 as well. 2007, in fact, as part of the planning process that came together. Of course, they have a meeting tonight on Earth Day, so they aren't here, but we are represented well by some members in the audience who have some good environmental expertise if a question gets beyond what we can answer in the panel. And we have a director of the Office of Environmental Quality. He is the city's project coordinator, Bill Skrayback, here on the panel. I'll read his bio in just a moment, but that's who we have organized and operating and overseeing this program. There is a variety of elements that I'd like to point out. I would just point out in 2020, I want to read you the elements of the Environmental Action Plan, and you'll see how far we have yet to go. And these environmental action plans, there's a set of objectives for 2020. That's exactly where we are. And I just want to say we're making progress. Here's 2020 just as an example. By 2020, increase the number of commuters who use public transportation alternatives by 25%, including scooters. Well, I'm just saying, it should be. By 2020, all new buildings to achieve LEED Gold standards. And this is particularly the city program on the city structures. By 2020, 60% of all existing buildings achieve a 20% energy consumption reduction. More on that, I guess we would hear as we look at the results. In 2020, complete 90% of the in-stream portion of the 4-mile run master plan. Coming along? Yeah. All right, yes. Retrofit 70% of feasible city facilities with the right kind of environmental controls, and explore water reuse operations. There's about 8 more, but that's every about 3 years. There's a set of actions that the city is committed to, and they're making progress towards that. And that's why we want to bring that kind of report card to you today. I would reach out way into the future, 2050. There's 2 bullets out there, how anybody can predict 2050. But by 2050, 80% of the city's energy portfolio will consist of clean, 80% clean, renewable energy sources. And by 2050, reduce emissions by 80% below the 2005 level. Some pretty high standards they've set for the city and for, frankly, our community. And we're glad to have them with us today. Let me talk about the panel for a moment.
and then I'll turn them loose to give you some more information. Our panel is made up of a set of experts, and they are happy to be here. I know they were immediately available once I called them, and they're happy to talk about this subject with you. On the first end here, William Bill Skrabak, Deputy Director, TNES, Infrastructure and Environment. Again, he is overseeing the elements of the action plan and overseeing the city's performance. Degree in Chemical Engineering from Lafayette College. He's been working for the city for 30 years. 30 years. He had a brief stint elsewhere, decided he had to get to Alexandria as fast as he could. His first half of the career with the city is working in the health department, and then upon really the instantiation of this program into TNES, Bill was promoted and became the TNES Manager of Office of Economic Quality. So he's been involved with this from really the project from the beginning on Echo City, and we'll talk more in a moment about how we're doing. Next is Andrew McDonald. Andrew McDonald, many of you know him. Frankly, he's an environmentalist of note in and of himself. He was a former vice mayor of Alexandria who holds a PhD in geology from the University of Western Ontario. He was the chair of the Interstate Commission on the Potomac River Basin as appointed by Governor Warner. He for a while wrote a biweekly column that competed with Michael Pope. That's not true. Alexandria Earthwatch was the name of his column in the Gazette packet for a number of years. So he's an author. He's written opinion pieces for the Washington Post and the Baltimore Sun. Taught geology with a focus on environmental issues at George Mason and Johns Hopkins. And since 1990, he's led history trips to Antarctica, the Arctic, and Southeast Alaska. So an environmentalist of note. Another one of environmentalists of note is Dean Naujux. Dean Naujux is a Potomac River keeper. I mean, if you learn about this program, it's remarkable that a citizen, a professional environmentalist has taken such keen interest in the river that runs adjacent to Alexandria. And as we know, that relationship between Alexandria and our river is an important relationship historically, and still has issues that Dean keeps an eye on, not just here, but Anacostia. This whole Potomac area is Dean's kind of province. He created a degree for himself at North Carolina State University in environmental policy and sustainable development, and really started his work down on the Yadkin River down in North Carolina, and since came up here in 2009, came here in 2015 to join the Potomac River Keeper Network. He'll explain more about that in a minute. And he'll talk more about what they're concerned about and what they've accomplished. It's pretty impressive. Speaking of impressive, our last panelist is Kenneth Warren, co-founder and CEO of CURE. He'll explain what C-U-R-E means in a moment. He's a senior at T.C. Williams, missing his last day of spring break. I just had to point that out. Happy to be here, and often you'll find him in front of either city council or school board talking about environmental issues. I think it's exactly right we have a young man on the panel, and whether a young man or a young lady, and someone of his age talking about the future that he's concerned about. And I think you'll find his comments and his point of view very, very interesting. So that said, we're ready to roll. We've got what we need, the right audience, the right panel, the right subject on the right day. So what I'd like to do is introduce first my password to the computer, and then we'll get the slides up and running.
While he's getting the slides ready, again, good evening. My name's Bill Skrabak with the Department of Transportation and Environmental Services. In some places, that's the Public Works Department. I'm a big part of the Environmental Services section of TNES. I manage the Office of Environmental Quality as well as the Stormwater and Sanitary Sewer Divisions. Bob mentioned about how EcoCity got started, and actually I see that Del Pepper is joining us tonight. It was really an idea from Del Pepper and Councilman Rob Kuprika that really decided that the city needs to up its game with respect to the environment. We had always been doing the right thing, and from my perspective, I think we were trying to be a leader, but the leadership said, hey, we really need to take our effort to the next level, and that's what really got EcoCity Alexandria started. So thank you, Del. All right. If you can go to the next slide. I'm going to try to do these real quickly. Basically, I tried to do a quick recap of EcoCity, which Bob touched on, so I'll go through that pretty quickly. A few of the highlights, and then in the 10 principal areas of EcoCity, I tried to put about 1 or 2 slides of accomplishments, and then wrapped it up with a slide of which direction we're moving forward in terms of programs and/or goals. So again, this is just, as he mentioned, 2007, we had the launch. We adopted the EcoCity Charter, which is the guiding principles for the city with respect towards sustainability. And then we adopted the first action plan in 2009. We covered this a little bit about what an EcoCity is. So we can go to the next one. The 10 principal areas are in the upper left, and I'm not going to read them all to you, but you can understand they're land use, transportation, open space, water, solid waste. Those are the big ones. And it was a very lengthy document. There were 363 actions and 48 goals and 50 preliminary targets. So it was a data-driven exercise. If you go to the next slide. This is some of the highlights of what we've accomplished since we've adopted the EcoCity Action Plan. We've reduced our greenhouse gases as a community by more than 13%, basically getting back to as if it were 2005, with more aggressive goals, as Bob mentioned, moving forward. We shut down the largest air pollution source in the city, as well as the entire metropolitan Washington area, the Mirror coal-fired power plant. We are moving in the right direction on vehicle miles traveled. We're using our cars per capita on a less. We've increased our recycling rate, nearly doubled it. We met our 100%. We met our 100-acre goal of additional open space in the city since we adopted the Open Space Master Plan. We also adopted, as part of EcoCity, a green building policy, and 95% of all the development since that policy has been enacted meets the city's green building policy, which is either LEED certified or LEED silver. And that then requires the building to use more efficient energy, conserve water, site itself that it can use, transit and other options, and those are the things that get you points under the LEED system. And then the other thing that we now have a plan that I'm sure some of the other panelists will talk about more is addressing our combined sewer system. Working with Alex Renew, developed a partnership and developed a very aggressive plan as a result of the state legislation, where we will basically take the CSOs and by 2025, not eliminated them entirely, but for other than a day or two here or there, all that will be taken care of. Just could you go back one, just because it's one nugget that I'd like to point out. If you look at the bottom slice of this pie, that's the greenhouse gases generated by our community, and the government is only 4%. So if we want to be an eco-city and move forward and hit our aggressive goals on reducing greenhouse gases, I could snap my fingers tomorrow, and that only gets, with the government, if we went all renewable, that would only be a 4% reduction. So it really takes not just the government to do its part, it's really the community is going to have to step up as well. In terms of the principle of air quality and environmental health, I have good news to report. Air quality is improving. Within our local control, we were able to, as I said, close down the largest air pollution source in the metropolitan Washington area after about a 10-year effort, I might add. The Covanta waste-to-energy facility on the west end of the city has state-of-the-art air pollution control equipment that was added both in the year 2000, as well as they will be upgrading its air pollution equipment over the next 3 years to further reduce oxides of nitrogen pollution. Another point, the other third in the largest point sources in the city was Virginia Paving, and several years ago they had to come in for a new special use permit, and if they weren't allowed to operate at night, and we all know that a lot of paving operations now have to happen at night. So they had to get a new special use permit, and we put on and required them to do significant air pollution controls at that time, as well as stormwater management. So we feel like we've done a good job addressing the point sources of air pollution in the city. We don't, as a locality, have the ability to regulate smaller sources like cars. That's done at both the state and federal level. But if you go to the next slide. Oh. All right, maybe the next slide after
Try
that.
the next one.
Uh-oh.
Let's see. Dean, you don't have any slides.
Nope.
So how about you start, and I'll come back to Bill.
Okay. So, okay, my name is Dean Nyack. I'm the Potomac River Keeper. I work for Potomac River Keeper Network. We're based out of Georgetown. I live in Alexandria, actually right outside near Bellhaven Marina. And what we do is we serve as a voice for the river. We have several thousand members throughout the region. My jurisdiction goes from Harper's Ferry down to the bay, and basically all the tributaries that flow into it. So, you know, the Potomac River Basin's 14,000 square miles. It's a big watershed. It is, you know, almost 6 million people depend on it for drinking water. It's the lifeblood of the region. And so, you know, we take issues about water quality very seriously. Under the Clean Water Act, citizens have the ability to use the Clean Water Act if the state or federal agencies are not enforcing clean water laws, and actually stand in the shoes of the Attorney General and bring polluters to court if necessary. And so a lot of what I do is often enforcing environmental laws and regulations, or tightening up permits, putting pressure on state agencies like Virginia Department of Environmental Quality or Maryland Department of Environment, and holding them accountable for doing their jobs, and you know, holding polluters accountable for complying with the law. And so when we see a problem up the river or anywhere, we tend to respond to that. We just recently forced the city of Frederick up on the Monocacy River. We're out of compliance for a number of years. They went under a consent decree for their failing sewage plant, and after 5 years, they still were out of compliance. This was starting to go on 10 years now, and we talked to the state agency, and they said, you know, we've tried all we could. We can't really do much more. They're not meeting their timelines, so we filed notice of intent to sue under the Clean Water Act, hoping it would lead to some settlement discussions. They did not want to enter into those, so then we filed a case, and they, lo and behold, agreed to fix their sewage treatment plant. And so we have lots of examples of that all up and down WSSC's water plant, throughout the river basin, issues that we've worked on. And we worked on this issue about 3-4 years ago when I first started. We felt that Alexandria's combined sewer system was problems. They were working to fix it. The long-term control plan, which they were moving to submit the plan to Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, was going to address 3 of the major outfalls. There's 4 major outfalls that discharge into the Potomac River, or tributaries of the Potomac River. But the one outfall 01 that discharges into Orinoco Bay, really didn't have a plan. It was literally going to continue to discharge about 70 million gallons of combined sewage and stormwater well into like 2042 and beyond. And we just felt that that was a real problem. We started, you know, first approaching, meeting with Bill, working with the city. We talked with Mayor Silverberg. We actually spoke before the city council back in May of 2016. And I said, you know, you're 3/4 complete with your plan, but there's still this major outfall that needs to be addressed. They agreed with me, and they sent the plan back to staff. And I don't know what happened behind closed doors, but basically outfall 01 was never really addressed. And when the city of Alexandria submitted their plan to Virginia Department of Environmental Quality for approval, that's when it started getting a lot of media attention. The Washington Post picked it up. And you know, we basically had said that this was going to backfire. This was going to cause a major issue with the city once people started figuring out that they were discharging 70 million gallons a year out of outfall 01 right into an Orinoco Bay, particularly when the city was moving forward with upgrading their whole waterfront, trying to revitalize their waterfront, bringing people down to the water. They wanted to create public access, all the things that we support, right? This city has a direct connection to the Potomac River. We just felt like that plan was not adequate, and we were willing to challenge that plan legally. But once I guess Virginia legislature started seeing a lot of the attention that was happening with this plan, that they, I guess, passed a bill or introduced a bill that required the city to fix its combined sewer system within an 8-year time frame. The city thought that that was too aggressive of a time frame. We hired a consultant who said that that was actually a doable plan. That plan was actually submitted to the governor, who was looking at the bill on his desk, whether he supported it or whether the 35 Democrats that were fighting it to support Alexandria said that he should veto it. And the governor, to his credit, didn't want to fall on that sword because he had said he was committed to cleaning up the bay, cleaning up the Potomac River, and signed that bill into law about 2 years ago. And since then, I have to say, I think the city has moved very aggressively on implementing that plan. We've started participating in some of the stakeholder processes. Alexandria Renew has been great to work with, and you know, they're committed to fixing that problem and upgrading its combined sewer system. So that's been one of the major issues that we've been directly involved in. I don't know if there's going to be more questions about it, but that's
Well,
hopefully.
Dean, I would say that
You kinda put me
we've
on
got
the
the
spot a
slides
little
back up on air quality, but when we get to water quality,
Sure,
I would say Bill probably has the other side of the issue.
Sure.
But let's just make sure we've got that understanding of that outfall and the combined sewer system. We'll have more questions on it and more
Sure.
comments. And Bill, as you proceed, we've got the slides up here. Feel free, and we'll be back to the issue.
Sure, and I'm going to try to run through these a little quick, so bear with me, because I know that you wanted to listen to the whole panel. So this just shows the downward trend, both in terms of code red days and the air quality standards. So the good news on air quality is we are moving in the right direction, and we're almost meeting all the national ambient air quality standards. Just as soon as we meet the ozone standard, then they drop it lower, so then we're in a constant battle of playing catch up. But as you can see in the bottom left, that's the ozone numbers, and they're all going down. If you go to the next slide, this is moving forward. These are just some of the goals that we have, trying to make sure we comply with all the ambient air quality standards. We also are partnering with the health department on, there's a lot of issues with indoor air quality and mold, so they're looking at possibly having a mold task force. And then the big thing the health department will be pursuing is a community environmental health assessment, and that's where the community will identify what those health issues that the health department should focus on based upon community input and feedback. If you go to the next slide, talk a little bit about climate change. I will say the whole environmental action plan has a very significant slant towards climate change. I think there's a lot of agreement that this is the issue of our generation that's really challenging us all to do more. And so, again, we've achieved that 13% reduction in our community-wide greenhouse gases, getting back to 2005 levels. People don't know it, but the waste-to-energy facility where we dispose of our trash after we've pulled out all the recyclables and all the household hazardous waste, that's much more energy efficient and actually reduces greenhouse gases compared to any conventional landfill. So the using Covanta as our solid waste disposal facility actually reduces greenhouse gases as well. If you go to the next slide, we've replaced all the traffic lights with LEDs. We've installed solar on Beatley Library, as well as Witter Recreational Fields. And then individuals in this city have installed about 27 individual solar projects on their personal residences or businesses. In terms of what the city's doing to try to be more resilient in the response to climate change, the first here is our community rating system. By the city managing its floodplain, we all know that climate change leads to larger and more intense rain events. And so by the city having a good management of its floodplain management ordinance, we are a level 6. Doesn't mean much unless you buy flood insurance, but by us maintaining this program and not allowing residential to be built in the floodplain and those kind of things, Anybody that needs to be or is required to buy flood insurance in the city of Alexandria because of this program gets a 20% discount. And so we do encourage you, if you are in the floodplain or near the floodplain, we strongly encourage you to purchase flood insurance. And then the other thing I'll just mention is the waterfront mitigation plan. We all know the nuisance flooding, and the city's working on that plan to try to reduce that impact. In terms of future goals, as Bob mentioned, there's the 50% reduction by 2030 and 80% reduction by 2050. We've accelerated and started installing street lights that will be LED, and we've accelerated that program in this year's proposed budget. We are transitioning all the city energy city purchases to renewable using renewable energy certificates, as well as starting planning for generating more renewable. If you go to the next slide. Starting on transportation, as I said earlier, we've reduced vehicle miles traveled. We've installed the Metroway along Route 1, the designated bus route. There's about 54% of the Dash fleet is now hybrid buses. And then we all know that we're moving forward with the metro station at Potomac Yard for transit-oriented development. If you go to the next slide. The city has spent a lot of time and effort on these non-motorized things. We've installed many capital bike share facilities. We've got 39 miles of on and off street bike lanes. We've completed the updated pedestrian and master plan. If you go to the next slide, kind of some future goals. We're really focused on low carbon. So the city fleet we're trying to reduce to either hybrid or electric. And we have long-term goals for the Dash bus fleet to be transitioning to all electric as well. The goal is to reduce, let's see, let's go to the next one. Green building. This is a favorite topic. The city's been a leader in green building. Back in 2005, the city adopted its own green building policy applicable to city government buildings. So any municipal building since 2005 has either been LEED Silver or LEED Gold. Are people familiar with LEED for the most part? It's a measuring stick to measure how green your building is. And so this is just the long list of city buildings and city buildings that have green roofs. There are several that are really standouts. There's a few. TC was a gold. James K. Jefferson Houston, I believe, was gold. The new police station was gold. I like the LEED Silver fire station, where we also have affordable housing on top of it, dual purpose use. We've also, when we were going through the first EcoCity effort, we developed a Green Building Resource Center online that we hope to be updating shortly. So that's on the city side. If you go to the next slide, as I mentioned earlier, 95% of all the private development and public development in the city has been either LEED certified or LEED Silver. So if it's a commercial building, it's requirement to be LEED Silver. If it's residential, it's required to be LEED certified. And the city is in the process of upgrading those policies and standards as we speak. I think they're looking to go to council in June for new, tighter green building standards. Another excellent green building was the use of the Alex Renew facilities, where they have a large detention tank facility for their processing, nutrient management at their facility. And what did they do? They put a soccer field on top of it. If you go to the next slide, so like I said, we're going to be updating the city's green building policy. If we go to the next slide, another great topic, water quality. Dean mentioned a lot of it. There is a bay cleanup goal that the city is required, as the city has a stormwater permit, and we have to meet target reductions in 5-year cycles. It's 5% in the first 5 years, 35%, total of 40% after 10 years, and then 100% after 15 years. And we've accelerated, and we are after the first 5 years, instead of meeting 5%, we actually met 40%. So we're well on our way. We've also just completed the stormwater pond retrofit on Eisenhower Avenue, the Lake Cook facility. and we will be, if you go to the next slide, updating the pond at Brenbenman Lake. The cost for doing all that stormwater management is in the order of magnitude of $40 to $50 million. So over the last 2 years, we've developed a stormwater utility fee, which provides for more equitable funding of stormwater management. That also provides a credit program, so if you do things on your own property that improve water quality, you can get a reduction in your stormwater fee. Okay, if you go to the next slide. This is another important project that we were talking about, the CSO. If you're familiar with the waterfront, you can see that yellow line and then a blue tail, that's the upper part of that fish hook. And then in the middle where both of those tunnels meet is Alex Renew. And so basically, as I said, in partnership with Alex Renew, we came up with a plan, and now Alex Renew is taking the ball and running with it, and we'll be building this project. The goal is to finish it by 2025 per the state legislation. The cost is on the order of magnitude of $370 million is kind of the midpoint. It could be, this is early in the cost, so if it goes a little, or maybe a little bit more than that, be prepared. It's a big capital project, and we are at the very early planning stages, so the costs can fluctuate a fair amount. And doing it on an aggressive time schedule in some ways can save you money, in other ways it can hurt you. So we'll have to see when the bids come in how close that forecast cost is. If you go to the next slide, these are the goals for water quality, making all the water bodies fishable and swimmable, meeting our infrastructure requirements of making sure we have good sanitary infrastructure, making sure we have a good treatment plant, again with Alex Renew taking the lead, and then also making sure we have a fresh drinking water supply. If you go to the next slide, land use and open space, and I'm going to try to go a little faster. We've finally implemented the Windmill Hill Park Plan, which is a much more environmentally friendly design than the original design. We've opened the interim waterfront park that's getting a lot of great attention. And then we've preserved some wetlands along Little Hunting Creek. If you go to the next slide. You mentioned about the 4 Mile Run master plan. We had to make some changes in midstream for that, and so instead of doing things within the channel, we actually did a wetlands restoration project just adjacent to the stream of 4 Mile Run, and we're now looking as developer dollars come in from Potomac Yard to do some of the other improvements in 4 Mile Run. Now each small area plan is now required. It has a sustainability chapter, so that particular neighborhood or small area plan, we try to identify what sustainable principles and things we can do in that unique part of the city. If you go to the next slide, some of the existing targets that we're keeping, there's currently a 40% goal of trying to hit 40% tree canopy. We're keeping that, and then we are looking at increasing the amount of open space as we move forward with creating a new steering committee. If you go to the next slide, solid waste, as I said earlier, we've increased from about 25-30% up to 50%. We've extended the contract with Covanta so that at considerable savings to the city and the community, and they just completed their new Waste Smart plan for solid waste management, which is really the path forward. And we all know recycling has been having its challenges with the markets and everything going on in China. If you go to the next slide, even solid waste plans, we're looking at greenhouse gas. We don't necessarily want to implement something without doing an analysis to make sure it has a net improvement on the environment. And this is where we're going to be counting on you. We're going to try to actually, instead of recycling more, and is actually generate less waste. So that's where the community is going to have to help pitch in. If you go to the next slide, as I'm wrapping up here, we are in the update of the EAP 2040. There's a draft that's online. The goal is to go to City Council in June of this year. There's actually a work session with City Council tomorrow night and the Environmental Policy Commission. And I would encourage you, if you're interested, just to go online and look at the full document. Thank you.
Ooh, a lot of work. A lot of work, a lot of accomplishments. We appreciate that. We'll get back to another issue or two that I know you're interested in expanding on. I'd like to go now to Andrew. You know, you can't go through such a large endeavor without a lot of citizen input. And you've been involved with a lot of citizen input in summits and a whole variety of things. Well, you're going to get a little more citizen input. Thank you, Dean, for what you mentioned about concerns about the water and the storm sewer problem. But Andrew, do you have any insights, or how would you like to present? You can use my mic. Yeah, slides up.
I'll try to get out of everybody's way. I just can't eat and sit and talk. Sorry. Well, I'll just start. I'm a former teacher, and I think the city has done a remarkable job. I think there's a lot of positive things, as Bill has pointed out, but I'm a tough grader. So my comments are going to be a little tougher, I think, at least in certain areas, trying to point out some of the weaknesses and the potential for doing some things perhaps to improve the plan. We formed a little group, and I just put this logo up called the Environmental Council of Alexandria. Jeremy Flax is on the board, is here, and my wife, Ann, is here as well. And we formed the group because we felt not enough attention was being given to preserving natural places in Alexandria. Not just places where you play ball and so on, but places like Monticello Park or Carrick next. I'm going to talk about a number of different issues: preserving biodiversity, adequate open space, protecting expanding tree canopy, healing streams and other industrial sites, trying to save the Potomac, preventing global warming. And I'd say there are a lot of very good plans in the city of Alexandria, but the results have been very mixed. And part of this is learning curve, but part of it is the failure, I think, to integrate some of these plans holistically throughout the city next. When I was growing up and going to college, just as our other speaker is about to do, there was a famous book by Ian McHarg called Design with Nature. And he was a Scottish landscape architect who talked about designing with ecology in mind. And what's very interesting is that he helped design the Winkler Preserve. The Winklers hired him to do it early on. So the early Winkler Botanical Preserve, which Rod Simmons worked in, was really a special place. It was unfortunately it is a private land, so that meant that it's not necessarily a public open space all the time. Next. But the Winkler Preserve, I think, illustrates what we can do. You can design around development, and you can preserve things. It's a stormwater pond there, but it preserved wetlands and other native biodiversity that's unique to Alexandria. And it's something I think we need to strive to do. Very difficult thing to do given the amount of development in Alexandria, but it's something we need to strive to do. Next. Alexandria has a natural resource management plan now, finally. And it's something we should have done a long time ago. And Rod Simmons and others have identified and inventoried all the natural resources of the city. What could be more important when you're designing with nature than to know what you're trying to preserve and protect? Next. This is the Carrick site, which a lot of you may have heard about, that a number of citizens fought to save off Seminary Road next to the temple, next to Bethel congregation. 3-acre piece of land that was on the open space list, I should say, and should have been saved and preserved. That is, if we want to protect the natural native resources of Alexandria, places like Monticello Park. Next. Just another view of it. Next. A lot of interesting biodiversity in Alexandria that we never think about. Wild azaleas. Next. Migratory songbirds that come through Monticello Park and places like Carrick. And do you know what they all need, besides a little bit of water? It's trees. They need big, good, beautiful tree canopy, which places like Northridge have. So you don't save Monticello Park by just saving Monticello Park. You save it by saving trees throughout Alexandria. Next. The box turtle, which can live 100 years. It's a lovely, lovely creature. Wetlands. As Bill has pointed out, the city has tried very hard, and I think they've done a very good job here of trying to restore some of the stream valleys. When a city becomes 40% paved over, as Alexandria is, it's very difficult to protect small creeks and watersheds of the Potomac. Basically, above 25%, you lose a lot of the aquatic life. But the city is trying to go back in where they can and to restore some of these streams. But the other key point to this is that natural resource management plan. You have to understand what you're doing when you go in and try to restore something. Next. This is the wetland near the site where the Alexandria wants to build its metro station in Potomac Yard. I don't think anybody is against building a metro station in Potomac Yard. The question is it too near wetlands and should it be built somewhere else? Next. Open space. Bill has pointed out that we've made some pretty good strides from 2002 on, about 100 acres of different types of open space. It's a little hard to see, and it says purple is the amount that we've accumulated. The point I want to make is we're about 7 acres per 1,000. Cities like some of the West Coast cities, Seattle and so on, are 10 or 15 or 20. And as population rises, as it is in Arlington and Alexandria, that number is going down. We have to do a much better job acquiring open space for ball fields, for biodiversity, for all the things that we need in a city like ours. Next. Just mentioned Monticello Park, which needs the trees in order to have those wonderful songbirds coming from Central and South America to pass through here each year. Next. Trees, they do so much. Remove carbon dioxide, and as they get older, they remove more. Lower cooling costs, clean air and water. Next. We do have a forestry plan, which began actually when I was on the city council, and it's a great thing. It's being redone like many of the plans. But again, we need to integrate these plans better in the city's planning process for the environment. Next. Just again, another statistic saying what trees do. Next. In about 1997 or 8, I wrote a piece for the Washington Post Outlook talking about our effort to clean up the Chesapeake Bay. And little Alexandria is right in here, a little teeny, it doesn't seem like much, but it's an important piece of the watershed. And Bill has mentioned a lot of the things the city is doing, and some of these things, as Dean has pointed out, the city has been pushed to have to do. The combined sewer system. Next. Down near one of the overflow points down near Orinoco Bay, where the sewage and stormwater runs into the river when we have too heavy a rains. And we've got to stop that. It's nitrogen and phosphorus. When I was growing up and fishing at Jones Point, the river was heavily polluted. And when you add nitrogen and phosphorus, too much of it, you get algal growth, you deplete the oxygen, the fish can't live, and so on. Next. There's Orinoco Bay. Next. Also right near there is a number of industrial pollutants that we haven't talked about. I guess maybe Bill a little bit. But from about 1840s or 1850s to 1940, for about 100 years, we converted coal to gas. When you do that, you create a pretty nasty waste product full of organic compounds, some of which you create when you burn fire and so on. Next. And these are still leaking into the Potomac there at the foot of Orinoco Street. It's a difficult problem to solve, but these compounds are incredibly toxic to aquatic life, not very good for human beings either, and we have to stop it. Next. That's just showing the boom around the stuff. Next. Just a list of all these nasty chemicals, and I won't get into the geochemistry of these chemicals, but next. They can cause tumors in, this is a catfish from the Potomac, believed to have a tumor from not necessarily our PAHs, but some others, that it causes tremendous damage, cancers to fish and aquatic life. Next. The other thing it does, and this is the other thing we haven't talked about, but some of these compounds, because of the way when we pave parking lots and things, we're actually producing some of the same compounds that then are discharged and move around. Next. It's also an old industrial site there, the Bogle site, that produced pesticides for many years. Next. There's a lot of different chemicals there buried underneath sediment and clay that we need to address at some point. Next. Bill mentioned stormwater, and it's an incredibly important, and I don't think Bill didn't mention this, but Alexandria has a very aggressive stormwater management. We treat the first half inch of rain, which many jurisdictions don't, and we try to remove the nutrients before they get into the Potomac or a creek or into the river. They don't always look very nice. This is near Potomac Greens. Next. Here's one, too, that I don't know. There's a stormwater pond on Potomac Yards, and we are a little concerned that, next, that it may be leaking in places being discharged. And I don't know if that's the actual case or not, but we've seen runoff there. The point is, even these good environmental systems have to be monitored and checked and cared for. Next. I talked to someone about climate change, and they told me sooner or later we'll invent a machine that can capture carbon. Well, trees are a great thing to do that, but clearly it's not the only thing. We're not going to capture all the carbon we need to stop the greenhouse effects from occurring in Alexandria. As Bill's pointed out, we need to do other things. Next. The question is the LEED process, this architectural, where we design buildings, going to be good enough, or do we need to really have a more robust plan? New York now, going from sort of the Green New Deal, is adopting new standards for tall buildings and basically tying them directly to the amount of carbon they must reduce. The problem with the LEED process architecturally, it's sort of projected. It's what you hope will happen if you develop something. It doesn't necessarily mean you've gone out and monitored that building and you know that you've reduced everything by a certain amount. Next. Just probably saw that in the New York Times recently. Next. One thing it would be lovely to do, and the city's beginning to do a little bit of this, buy renewable energy. If you have a building like this and all the energy is produced on its roof, well, then that's a heck of a drop in greenhouse gases. You're not producing much. You're producing basically nothing. And in order to get the global standards and to reduce it by 40% or more, and the time we need to do it, place by place by place, we are going to need to be very aggressive. Next. 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 I know there's some members of council who are very interested, I think the vice mayor, in composting. Composting is not a bad thing, because if you take something to the landfill, it doesn't necessarily get reused, and it may be converted into methane that's not captured. If you compost stuff in your backyard, you get rid of, you don't produce methane. You produce basically carbon dioxide. And if those of you who know anything about the global warming thing, methane is a much more damaging gas in the atmosphere. It traps a lot more heat. So maybe it's something we want to do in Alexandria. Next. I'm a tough grader. I think Alexandria should get an A for effort. I think it's done a lot of great things. I think, though, that we have not done a good job preserving the natural biodiversity of Alexandria. I think we are going to have inadequate amount of open space unless we really move more strongly. That 7 acres per 1,000 is going to drop, and that's too low. That's not enough. The key tree canopy, we talk a lot about trees. We've been talking about it since 2000, early 2000s. We need to do more to care for trees on the streets, in backyards, and by setting aside more land. I think the city's done a pretty good job trying to heal streams that are damaged, but we need to take into account the natural resources that are there so that we don't damage other things while we're doing it. Cleaning up the waterfront industrial sites, well, that's incomplete. I give that an incomplete grade. The CSO, well, we know that's going to work, hopefully, but that's still incomplete. Preventing global warming, I think we need to do a lot more. I don't mean to be tough on the city, because I know they've worked very hard to try to integrate lots of things, but I think we need to take all these different plans and be much more focused about how we use all this information that we've collected and be more effective about what we accomplish. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew. Now let's give a hand to the other panelists who've already presented very much. All right, we've got a great number of insights, all right? And Andrew, thank you very much. Tough grader or not, that was the purpose here, is to make sure we have different perspectives up here, and we would like to offer now. Ken, would would you like to take a chance here? And you can use my mic and walk around all you wish.
Sorry, it's a little bit hot in here. I don't mean to.
He's flexing.
Yeah. Hello, everybody. My name is Kenneth Warren, and I'm the co-founder of Community United Renewable Energy Cure. I hope to do 3 things in this short presentation I'm about to give you. 1, keep you interested, not help you fall asleep. That's the first and primarily initiative. But more importantly, I want to introduce what Cure is, what we do, why it matters, and what I hope you take home today. So let's start with Cure. I co-founded Cure in the summer of 2016, coming home from India. In India, I had experience with a little girl, and I watched her drink polluted water. And she gave this polluted water to her mom as a source of drinking water on a day-to-day basis. And seeing that and having that experience, in some ways, in many ways actually, kind of flicked my switch. I realized that I didn't know what I had to do, but I had to do something. And I turned to the environment, and I co-founded Cure. With that being said, for the first year of Cure, in full transparency, we failed. We failed to effectively create change at an ACPS level for students, for taxpayers, really for anything. And it wasn't until a year later, when I went to Thailand this past summer, that I realized why we failed. When I was in Thailand, I worked with elephants, and I rehabilitated them into the environment. And when I saw rich kids take selfies on their phone instead of actually getting in and doing the work, that's when I realized what I missed in India. What I missed was, in India, we as a society focused too much on the little girl. We focused too much on making it better for her. We focused too much on adopting her. And out of that, we avoid and hide the fact that every single day, we poison the air that she breathes and the water that she drinks. So that's what Cure does. We combat those root cause issues that are plaguing especially the youth. So let me give you my elevator pitch. We're a student-led organization that combats climate change through student involvement, and we do this through 2 ways. 1, we educate. We teach kids why their actions matter, how they can make a difference, and how they can lead change within their local community. We then invest in schools to make sure that those teachings and those newfounded habits have the proper infrastructure in place to be supported. This year, we've partnered with ACPS in order to roll out a new educational program that's going to teach students exactly what I just told you in regards to the environment. On to my second topic that I hope you guys take home. The water is rising. As I look across this room, based on my initial glance, I can see a variety of opinions and perspectives, which is probably why you came to this event, to hear people talk on it and see if maybe you have inner debates or maybe you want to make up your own perspective. Whatever it is, whatever the outcome of your decision is, the water is rising. Because I don't know what tomorrow looks like. I don't know if I'm going to write my essay tonight and get that paper done tomorrow, or if I'm going to take the late grade or not. But no matter what, the water is rising. And when it does, when it goes from here and it gets to here, and we're all drowning, nobody in this room can say, I didn't know. Because after tonight, you will. And out of that knowledge and out of that education, you have the opportunity to make a choice. The way that I see things, it boils down to 2 options. 1, we can either ignore the issue and continue to pretend that it doesn't exist, or maybe we don't care about it enough to say, it's not going to happen in my lifetime, why should I care? Or 2, we can act, and we can act now. And it's acting, don't make a mistake about it, there's nothing easy about it. Nothing. But the way I see things, hopefully by the end of tonight, you'll make a decision, and I hope I can help persuade you to what I think that decision can be. Thank you so very much for attending this event. I look forward to all of your questions.
Okay, thank you, Kenneth. Appreciate it, and thanks to the panel. I've got a whole series of questions up here. Let me lead into it a little bit here. Briefly, Bill, you talked about the environmental action plan, and there's an effort underway to look at phase 2 of the update. Could you just expand a bit on that path? Because the 27th of April, I think, is our last, or is pretty much near the end of the update. Talk about where we are, because this audience is welcome to input.
Sure. So thank you again. The environmental action plan that we adopted in 2009, we're currently in the process of updating it. We have a draft of what we refer to as the Environmental Action Plan 2040. It's currently out for public comment, and you can look at it. It's online. You can send comments online. There will be copies at Alexandria Earth Day, which is next Saturday, so I'd encourage you to come to Alexandria Earth Day, which is our premier environmental education event on Saturday from 10 to 2 at GW Elementary School, the field right next to it. So I encourage you to come there. You can get a plan there. It was really a combination of all the short-term actions that we did in phase 1, and now that this phase is the final draft of both short-term, mid-term, and long-term actions. Again, following those same 10 principal areas that I talked about earlier, and setting new targets and new goals in an effort to try to move the city, as well as a large effort and a large part of the community feedback has been we need to up our community education and outreach across the board, has been a consistent feedback theme. So that's a big part of the new plan, is really trying to get the community more engaged and involved. Because like I said, the government's a small part of the problem. The community is going to have to
Sure.
pitch in to solve.
Well, you've heard 3 different perspectives here. Is it too late for, and Andrew, what did you call that at the beginning, the nature of that environmental change you talked about, built around the existing resources?
You mean design with nature?
Yeah.
Yes.
So design with nature, you heard a little bit about. It's not mentioned in the plan, certainly that I read, but it's a perspective. So is that too much out of a box? Is it too late to take a learned perspective that is considered in the plan update?
No, it's never too late. So we'd encourage you to provide feedback. We do, as Andrew did acknowledge, there is, with any new development, there are stormwater management requirements that are regulated by both the state as well as the city, overlaid a more stringent local ordinance on top of that. So to the extent the city has a role in that, we're doing what the city can through its regulatory processes. That doesn't mean that we don't encourage, through public-private partnerships or through the preservation of open space on other parcels, which is part of what the city's toolbox for open space. Mm-hmm. If it can, as part of redevelopment plans, try to carve out and include some preservation areas, we try to do that. Or there's a big push for, if there is going to be some open space on a parcel, to make sure that it's more publicly accessible. So
that can still be input, and could be input that could be accommodated in whatever appropriate fashion.
Sure.
And there's also, Dillon rule issues occasionally on some of these.
Explain Dillon rule just for a minute.
Well, I mean, a
Vice
lot
Mayor.
of the basic laws that Alexandria has, City Council has, come from the state. So, I mean, we may not be able to set standards for, say, a commercial building to lower greenhouse gases without doing it through a special use permit or some. In other words, it may be more difficult than it would be, say, in New York City, for instance.
Right. I was going to say, we heard about the stormwater outfall at number 1, really down at West Point, the kind of hazards that are down there in terms of the gas. What did you call that, Andrew? It was when they converted coal to gas, it creates that byproduct.
It was called it was a town gas plant, but it's a manufactured gas, and they made gas for lighting and for cooking.
But the result of that process created
these coal tar, which is
tar.
sort of a misnomer because it's often more like vegetable oil. And
so is coal tar one of the items that is being a standard is written against, to include as well maybe some of the, well, let's go to coal tar. Coal tar, if it exists in West Point, is that the kind of goal in midterm or short term that could be addressed in the environmental plan?
It's not in the plan because we already have a specific plan just for that particular project. The city has spent a fair amount of money. We've completely characterized the site. We continue to do remedial action at the site. Last year, we dredged the worst of the sediment from the river. It is a challenging parcel because the actual source is about 1.5 blocks away from the river on a parcel that the city doesn't own. And so it's a challenge because we can't get at the source material. So we are trying to intercept it before it gets to the river. That has been proven a challenging task. It's far better than it was, but all our efforts have yet to be 100% successful.
Let me restate then. So it is addressed in a separate, specific plan to the coal tar and its
Correct.
remediation.
The city's entered that site into a voluntary remediation program administered by the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality that we work with and develop the standards, the cleanup standards.
Yeah.
And that's who our regulator is, and we've been working with them to try to resolve the problem. And we've done a lot, but we have not yet been 100% successful at sealing off the pipe.
Warren, are you going to, or Kenneth, are you going to take a look at the plan in terms of input and CURE and how they will provide input to the plan?
I know that I will personally look. Is my mic on?
Yeah, it's on.
Okay, sorry. I know that I would definitely take a look at the plan. I think that might fall out of the scope of CURE. But I think this is another great example of how a centralized topic can have multiple perspectives. When I went to Thailand, I went in thinking that elephants need to be immediately rehabilitated into the environment. But then once I got there, I realized that the Thailand economy depends vastly on elephant tourism. Yeah. So, and I worked with the people whose jobs depended on that. So I think, out of that experience and taking that and translating to this, there are multiple perspectives to this issue. From even on the panel, one is we might not have enough time to make changes, and if we do, then what's the impact of it? The other perspective could be we need to do this for the environment because it matters and it's our future.
How many members of CURE?
CURE has about 50 members that can be
So
called
50 different perspectives could input to the plan.
I hope more.
I do too. Perhaps that's a good set of eyes to maybe mobilize. That would be wonderful. Dean?
Bob, Potomac Riverkeeper Network has been working with the city on the issue of the gasworks site for the past 3 years, actually. And, the voluntary remediation program that Bill talks about, I mean, this is a program that's, overseen by Virginia Department of Environmental Quality, and it sounds great on paper, but this is just kind of a good example of where our regulatory agencies consistently fail to protect water quality and our environment. And for 50 years, basically oil has been hemorrhaging from that site into the Potomac River. It's contaminated the sediments. The city did clean up and dredge the sediments. We've been trying to work with them on addressing the pipe, but the Virginia Department of Environmental Quality wasn't going to require them to fix this problem and stop the discharge of oil, which is illegal. And it's breaking the law by discharging this oil consistently into the waters of the U.S. and right here in the Potomac River. So, this is just one example of where it takes groups like ours and citizens and people like Andrew to say, hey, this isn't being done right. The process is flawed. It's failed. We saw the same thing with the combined sewer issue, which I'm happy to articulate a little bit more. And so it's tough for someone like Bill, who's getting pressure to just, get this thing done when the state agency probably isn't requiring better of what the city could and should be doing, even though they have this eco-city charter. Some of these issues are really complex, but I really fault the regulatory agencies a lot of pressure they get to not enforce the laws from politicians and lawmakers that are doing the bidding of like corporate polluters, like I've seen with Dominion Power on coal ash, and the list goes on and on. So,
Bill, do you have enforcement authority? Does the city have enforcement authority? I mean, Dean brings up a great point.
For certain programs, we are Sometimes we're the regulatee, and sometimes we're the regulator.
For example?
For stormwater management, we're the regulator, where we require all new development to meet, as Andrew said, the treating. It's actually now the first 1 inch of stormwater management of all the stormwater from any impervious surface. And then they also have to meet the percent removal efficiency for nitrogen and phosphorus. But in that same tone, we have a permit from the state for our stormwater management system. So in that case, the state is regulating us. So then we have to comply with our permit, and which has requirements for public education and outreach, making sure we inspect all our outfalls frequently, making sure any reported illicit discharge or detection is addressed. And so in some cases, we have a dual role. Sometimes we're the regulator and sometimes we're regulated.
But he brings up a good point that if you're not empowered by, in this case, the CSO was a matter of law. I mean, in terms of how that was ultimately enforced. Could you use some more help in terms of enforcement clarity or consistency or strength of that enforcement from the agencies that enforce it?
Sure. The only thing there is a challenge being, as Andrew said, a Dillon rule state. And most the other, I think it's Virginia and Massachusetts, and maybe one other one is a Commonwealth and a Dillon rule state. So unlike a lot of other localities that can adopt more stringent standards through an ordinance, in Virginia, you can't do that unless the state has authorized you to do that. Or if the state's regulating some activity, then you can't do it as a locality.
But he brought out the Virginia regulatory activity can do that.
They can and they do, and I will say that they have been pursuing us to, whether it's the CSO issue, we had permits for that. I agree that the schedule has been accelerated, and I think that's a good outcome at the end of the day, where we're going to have an aggressive program and hopefully achieve that within our 5 years sooner than our original plan called for in the original EAP. So it's a balance of when you wear both hats, you kind of see both sides of the issue. And as a regulator, you try to be fair and balanced. As a regulatee, you hope for the same. And then you do the best job you can.
I've got a speed round for you here, Bill. Does Alexandria recycle glass? I've heard that Alexandria does not recycle glass.
Alexandria does collect glass through our recycling system. However, because of the drastic changes in the recycling market, it no longer is recycled. And so glass, as we all know, for it to be recycled, the single stream version of what the city's recycling plan does makes it very difficult for that end use. So the solid waste plan that was recently adopted does plan on looking at that, and the city does have a pilot program. So if you really want your glass to be reused and repurposed into something, we've started a partnership with Fairfax County. You would have to take your glass to our drop-off recycling centers, where there's now a big, large purple bin where all the glass, all the different colors can go in the same bin. It's then transported to Fairfax County, where it's then processed, and then they reuse it for like road bedding or backfill instead of it just going to the landfill.
Okay, so look for that collection point then.
Yes.
How much does jet exhaust contribute to our air pollution? Is that an element that's considered?
Relatively, yeah. The airplanes are a large source of air pollution in this region, particularly at the takeoff. That's when they're throttling up and they're using the maximum amount of fuel. We all know that it's when you're hitting that accelerator, that's when the most pollution comes out. So we are impacted by Washington, much more so by Washington National Airport than.
I mean, there's a group that monitors that traffic, citizen-formed group.
There's a group, but we're particularly the city's involved with the noise aspects of National Airport. There's a group that's been formed that the city has citizen representation on, trying to tweak the flight paths a little bit to push them a little further back.
Is air pollution one of the items they talk about?
No, that's primarily a noise
Yeah,
thing.
so
that,
maybe
the
more
federal
on that.
government would be the ones that regulate the standards for aircraft.
Okay. How does, you brag a little bit, how does Alexandria stack up with other nearby cities and Eco City accomplishments? Thank you.
The city participates in the Virginia Municipal League, which is a scoring system trying to measure and generate points for the different green activities. So we've been doing that, I think, for about the last 10 years. And for the last 8 or 9 years, we've been recognized at the highest level. So I think compared to our other Virginia jurisdictions, we are in the top echelon, with Arlington and some of the Charlottesville, the really progressive Virginia communities. Comparing us to, San Diego or someplace, we have ways to go. I think that we're on the right track to move us there. But in terms of Virginia, we're a leader. Nationally, we want to get there on the national stage.
Dean, what do you think about that? How's the city doing as it compares of other cities that touch the river?
I mean, I think obviously they're doing a lot of good things, that obviously Bill pointed out. But, as Andrew talked about, I mean, there's things that I think obviously could be addressed. And, and the things that I'm particularly working on, they are addressing them. But like I said, there's just other issues that I think, look at.
Yeah, I think with a $340 million maybe low estimate or median estimate for our CSO solution, how much money is left to accomplish every goal you might see in the environmental action plan?
Funding is always the big challenge for all these things. The CSO issue will be addressed, and we as a community will all be funding that through our sanitary sewer tax bill. Sanitary sewer bill for that is done. Like I said, that just the stormwater piece of our requirement to clean up the Chesapeake Bay is another additional $40 to $50 million on top of that. We have been very successful at getting several state grants. I think we're up to nearly $5 to $6 million of state grants, and the city and Alex Renew have been aggressively pursuing state grants, and we received a state grant of I think it's $25 million for our CSO project. Hopefully we can go back to that well and get some additional funding. But funding with all these things is a challenge, and that's one of the reasons why the stormwater utility was so important, because that created designated funding to address our stormwater issues. Obviously, things like transportation and major infrastructure are very expensive, but in many of those cases, it makes sense to put those dollars into those big infrastructure items, because they're going to be with us for 50 or 100 years.
So it boils down to priorities, and no doubt the citizen input on the plan that's being updated is important. So we spend whatever money we've got in the right areas.
That, and I would just encourage citizens that want to take it to the next level, which is really participate in the budget process. We all know the city.
Sewers have constituencies, is that what you're saying?
Surprisingly, we did have people that were on the CSO group that came out and supported that. But I would just encourage people, it's great to have the action plan, but in many cases where things get implemented is through the budget process. And so that's the second part of the process that people need to also engage and participate in, because if you have, pick your energy conservation, solar, water.
There's 10 areas.
Pick your area. We're all competing for resources.
Right.
Some we have to do by state law or local mandate. Others that are things we want to do, and it's a resource issue.
Kenneth, you look like you're waiting to make a point, or you have a question.
Yeah. I think I would kindly and politely disagree with some of the earlier comments. I think from an infrastructure standpoint, I feel like we kind of lead behind the state, our neighbors, really. I mean, if you look at Arlington and Fairfax from an infrastructure efficiency standpoint, we're kind of falling behind. First-hand experience and the depth of my knowledge is in school systems and the infrastructures associated with them. Arlington is far ahead of us, and so is Fairfax as far as energy efficiency. Sir, some of the information you provided earlier, I know just from personal experience at TC Williams, the gold certification, I believe, is no longer in effect because there were 6 to 8 pivotal infrastructure points of TC Williams, and throughout the years, due to deferred maintenance, which is another core issue of the city's infrastructure as a whole, TC Williams is no longer as energy efficient as it once used to be.
And you're on it.
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. We're
All right.
trying to LEDs and all that stuff.
Well, I've got questions that, let's see. How do you join Andrew's group? Obviously, meet him afterwards, and he'll give you all the contact information you might need. And is CURE only a student group? Can other than students join CURE? Well, he's going to stay afterwards and give all the contact information a person may want. You can do the same thing,
Okay,
right?
sorry, I thought that was a question, Andrew.
No. You'd probably like to have them join, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, if you or anybody in this audience is interested in helping CURE at any level, one of our board members is in the back. Her name is Kimberly. Please go to her. We have business cards. We're more than happy to accept members as we continue to expand.
Good. All right, this is a poll of...
And if you care about clean water and the Potomac River, we have brochures here too for Potomac River.
So
for now.
2-in-1,
Yeah.
folks. Come on.
Yeah.
Come on.
Yeah, absolutely. This is a poll to the panel. We only have till 2030 to reduce carbon emissions and stabilize the climate. Do you agree with this statement, and what can Alexandria do? Just tell me, we've got till 2030 to stabilize the environment. Any opinions along the line here?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I think that's scientifically supported. There's data behind that statement. There's no question we have until 2030 to do some serious
Andrew?
difference.
Oh, yeah, I certainly agree.
Stabilize the environment. What do you think, Dean?
Yeah, and I think things like we just talked about earlier, the Green New Deal, I think, is kind of changing how people are looking at the issue of climate change. It's creating the idea that we can build jobs and regrow our economy through dealing with the issue of climate change, and I'm encouraged to see that it's being talked about and addressed at the state level as well as at the national level.
I would just say that it's speeding up. And I spend a lot of time in the Arctic and so on, and I know that's Arctic and polar bears are not here, but you can see it happening very quickly there for various reasons. The other day I read that Baltimore was going to be like Mississippi and Boston was going to be like Baltimore in a very short period of time, 30, 40, 50 years. And it's accelerating all the time, which means that we really have to take this is one of the most important things that we can do as a society. The difficult part, and Bill knows this very well, is working for the city, is that we also have huge pressures to develop a tax base. And somehow we have to do those two things simultaneously.
How do you feel about that, Bill?
I agree that 2030 is a key time frame, and we really
That's when our plan ends. Right now we're at 2030 in the first iteration of the plan.
And there's those big reductions for CO2 emissions, and that's from a climate change perspective. Everything, and we try to monitor that. All the models, all the models are forecasting. Each update and assessment shows that the models are on the right track, but things are happening much quicker than what the modeling existed. So, it's an important issue, and I hope people understand that it's each of us taking actions that we can each do, every day about choices that can help impact it. But it's going to really be everybody doing their fair share, and it will require both state and federal leadership to do some of those big hurdles, like requiring a certain renewable energy portfolio of the energy grid in Virginia, and not have it just be a voluntary goal, but actually put it in a state law and make them required to hit it.
There were a number of questions that ask about how do you convince the unconvinced, and what do you do with regard to making this point. Thank you for what you provided. I think you've given examples. Thanks for your examples as well. so I can dispatch with that pile. I have a large amount of other things that I can't get to with 10 minutes we have left, but I want to talk flood mitigation on the waterfront for a moment. How do you, Dean, how do you see flood and flooding in the Potomac Basin as it relates to climate change and the impacts? You must at least consider that every day.
I mean, I was going to say with your last question, you know, when you talk about climate crisis, you're also talking about water crisis on a global scale, people being displaced because of lack of water. But, you know, the impacts of climate change, you know, we're seeing this locally right here. I mean, the Alexandria waterfront is consistently having issues with flooding. It seems like I haven't been here a long time, but more so on a frequent basis. And the bottom line is we know that that's going to get worse, right? So it's just such a huge issue that, you know, I feel like, you know, thankfully storms like Superstorm Sandy and others, people are starting to aware, the climate deniers who bought into all the misleading propaganda, unfortunately, are starting to recognize that, you know, this is a real issue, and it's not just about polar bears and, you know, icebergs, that this is having an impact locally, and we could give a million examples of that, but we are starting to see that here.
Yeah. Speaking of the waterfront as well, is there pollution along the waterfront? I mean, we see a lot of clutter along the waterfront. In fact, there was, at one point, a skimmer or something was supposed to be bought by the city. Is the clutter along the waterfront, the pollution, the polluted item, is there a reason to clear that away from the banks? Is there a good environmental reason to make the banks clear as opposed to, if you look at waterfront, not Waterfront Park, but Palmender or Windmill Hill Park, there's a lot of debris that seems to gather down there.
The challenge with that, and if anybody that, the city does do several voluntary cleanups over the course of the year. For the city to take that responsibility on and to clean that up on a regular basis, the cost would be considerable. What really we all need to do is control the source of the pollution and not throw it out the car window, or when you drop the thing and it goes in the garbage can, but then the wind blows it and it doesn't go in the can. That I can guarantee you, if it doesn't go in the garbage can, it's going to end up in our waterways. And so I'm old enough to recall those series of, you know, commercials that were encouraging people to not litter. I almost think we really need to do something like that again, because much of what we get along the river isn't necessarily coming from our own city. I'm sure a small portion is, but a lot of what the pollution comes from upriver, and so it's really a challenge to try to pick up that trash, because within a day or two, it would be right back there again. And so there really needs to be a focused effort on source control, because it's much better to prevent it from getting into the water than trying to clean it up afterwards. Yep. Even though we do try to do that on working with the Alice Ferguson Foundation, and we just last weekend, I think, had our big cleanup with them, and we helped coordinate that at about a half dozen cleanup sites around the city.
And Bob, the combined sewer system is going to help with that a lot.
Absolutely.
The city of DC just put their new tunnel online on the Anacostia. In 1 year, it captured 5 billion gallons of combined sewage and stormwater, and also over 100,000 tons of trash that did not go in the river in its first year of operation. And so the next tunnel is going in on the Potomac for DC, and then Alexandria is hopefully going to fix theirs by 2025. That's a lot of sewage and stormwater and trash not going in the river. But I will say I've been a river keeper for 18 years. I just forced Dominion to clean up 28 million tons of coal ash. Dealing with trash in the rivers and our waterways is the biggest challenge I've ever faced, and I can honestly say it's one of the hardest issues I've ever tried to tackle, and I don't have good answers to it, other than what Bill's saying, like, we got to stop it at the source.
Do the skimmers work? Do they help at all?
Once it's in the river, it's in the river, yeah, so it gets rid of some. We need to keep it out of our waterways.
Just to break the ice here, this is a question I just have to ask. For all the panelists, which of the panelists' shoes is the most environmentally friendly? How recyclable or biodegradable? Go ahead, you Warren, you Kenneth first. How are your shoes? Are they biodegradable? I think they are. I'll give you a pass.
You know, I'm kind of ashamed of this, but sometimes my mom orders things off of Amazon.
Blame it on Amazon. We like Amazon.
So I hope.
Those look, Dean, they look completely biodegradable.
He's got the old Chuck Taylors, though. So
That's
they're
right.
cool as
I
shit.
mean, they're historic. They're too new to be biodegradable.
Oh, I've had them since I was, I guess, 6 years old.
And Bill, what can I tell you? All right. I'm sorry. Just had to ask that because I couldn't believe they asked it. Anyway, let me just make sure there's no other central issues. Biggest source of emissions that you're after. What do you think, Andrew? When you look at, I know you worked in the work to close the plants and do things. What is the biggest source of emissions right now that your council is interested in helping solve? You know.
I mean, air emissions?
Yeah.
Well, the group has been working more on, trying to preserve open space and protect the wetlands of Potomac Yard so far. So we really haven't been working on air emissions. I mean, as you know, the efforts that were made by Paul Hertel and Elizabeth Chimento and others to close the Morant power plant, I think probably was one of the more, and the city, and Del Pepper. That was an extraordinary achievement, I think. The problem with this, I think, here is that we're part of a larger airshed. So air quality is a regional issue. So maybe Bill can give a better question. When I was on the city council, there was a lot of concern about the asphalt plant at the other end of town. I'm not sure what the current status of that is. Bill has pointed out the Covanta, the waste energy plant. I mean, that offsets about energy for about 20,000 homes, I think.
Yeah. This is a question about development. How can we use requirements of developers to help them help us mitigate environmental concerns? Are we doing what we need to be doing to hold development and developers to the right kind of proffers or whatever it might be?
This is one area where I think that the city is doing a good job. It can always do better, but in addition to besides those of us here in Northern Virginia and a few select cities, most private development isn't required to meet any green building standard in Virginia. There's a few select communities that have chosen to go above and beyond, and the city's one of them. Arlington's another. That's one facet. The other thing we do is, as Andrew mentioned, through development conditions and policies, and we require developments to do certain things. So it's probably back since the 90s for when there was the big boom in townhouses in the 90s, and so we stopped allowing wood-burning fireplaces when you were starting to get 20, 30, 40 townhouses per acre. We said if you're going to have a fireplace, it has to be natural gas. We require low-float fixtures with any new development. There are some zoning requirements for tree canopy and open space. I think they're looking at those standards to see if they can be revised and to strengthen those. One of the things that it's hard to be, as a government, prescriptive. You kind of have to lay the basic regulatory framework and then make sure they're meeting that. And then part of it is for people to be creative and try to push the boundaries on their own of how can they do the next thing. I do, in terms of air pollution sources, you asked that. Really, it's the remaining large coal-fired power plants that are supplying the electricity, for 30 to 40% of Virginia. That substantial change needs to happen, and really going to renewable is really the answer to that.
Bob, I just got to weigh in. I'm sorry. There's only limits in terms of what Alexandria can do when you ask about what developers can do. And in my opinion, they're not doing enough. I mean, we still are using a 1940s subdivision design that uses curb and gutter, that sends polluted stormwater into our rivers and streams. And now there's new things like green infrastructure, what the city is trying to encourage. We see some new things occurring with a lot of development, newer development, but not enough. And it's really frustrating that in the 21st century, we're still building houses and roads and subdivisions and cul-de-sacs the same way we did 60, 70 years ago. And that has proven to completely destroy and damage our rivers and streams and water quality. And of all the sources of pollution going into the bay, where waste treatment plants like Renew have upgraded, we've made substantial improvements, stormwater pollution is the fastest growing source of pollution to the bay, and one of the biggest problems that we're going to deal with trying to fix that. So I don't think they're doing enough.
Speaking of doing enough, and I appreciate that, Dean, last question, one for each of you. This audience here is obviously interested in the environment and environmental issues. You have one request of them. One request before you leave. What would you request of our audience in terms of how they can help? I'll start with you, Kenneth.
Can't have one, I have two. The
All
first
right.
one is become educated. Do the research from reputable sources and have proper internet literacy. And make up your mind based on what you do research and evaluate the opinions of both sides. And then two, based on the opinion, make your decision, which is what I talked about in my opening. You have basically two decisions to make. You can either, one, not do anything, or two, act. And both have their pros and cons. But either way, make a decision. And I hope that from the information that you've been provided tonight, in part, that can help you make your decision. But whatever you do, you just can't say, I didn't know, because now you know.
All right, thank you. Dean?
I would say we really got to start holding politicians more accountable. The bottom line is 80% of the public, poll after poll, shows that Americans support clean water and investments in clean water infrastructure. But when a lot of people talk to their elected officials, they don't bring this issue up, even though it polls very high. And it's not until there's a crisis, like a combined sewer system that's dumping sewage or coal ash leaking the river, that people get engaged and they can't believe it's happening and they want to take action. We can't wait for that, especially with things like climate change. We must start telling our lawmakers that this is important to us. We want you to do something about it. We want you to be proactive and not just sit on your hands and wait to hear about what everybody else is doing. Show some real leadership and start getting in those trenches and fighting for clean air and clean water, because my daughter's 14, her life is depending on it. She's depending on the elected officials that we have now to actually do the right thing on behalf of clean air and clean water.
Okay. Andrew?
Well, I certainly agree with both those things. I mean, locally, joining groups like the Potomac River Keeper, the Environmental Council of Alexandria, other groups that are working on these issues locally is a great way. I mean, obviously people are very busy. You can't be expected to know about every issue that's on the table. But if you join these groups and then those groups put pressure, as Dean was saying, on the city council, especially during the budget process, because all of these items we're talking about require money, but they also require a political force. In other words, politicians knowing that there's citizens who want to see developers held accountable, more accountable, want to see more innovative approaches to development and so on. So,
Bill?
So I concur with what everybody has said. The only other thing I would say is don't let not knowing and becoming an expert in climate change or an expert in water prevent you from taking action in how you live your life, and do what you can. Some things are pretty simple, whether it's simple things like swapping out the LED light bulb, or insulating your house, or walking to work instead of driving your car, or buying something that because of the packaging and it's not generating a bunch of plastic waste or something else. It's not, you don't have to become an expert in all of it, but if you understand the basics of some of the things and then try to act on it and make your daily decisions knowing probably one is better for the environment than the other, try to lean in and do the one that's better for the environment.
Thank you, Bill. 30 years in city government, leading the environmental cause, worth a hand, I think. Thank you very much, Bill. Appreciate that. Listen, two more things to make. One, thank you to the panel. You'll be able to talk to them afterwards. I think you probably have a couple more questions. I think I got through most of the particular questions. I'd like to thank the audience, many of you who helped us in Spring to Action this year. The giving program that was 2 weeks ago, I would just point out that because of your support, our member supports and city support, I think it was the best we've ever had by, I don't know, Donna, times 5? Triple. So we tripled our donations in support of Agenda Alexandria. I have to thank you. Thank you very much. And I would say this Sunday, April 28th, come at 2 p.m., help plant 18 oak trees at Chinquapin Park. Details, talk with Paul Friedman. Raise your hand, please. Talk to Paul after this. So that's 18 oak trees at Chinquapin this Sunday at 2 p.m. Ladies and gentlemen, let's give our panel a hand. All right, give yourself a hand too, and thank you very much for being with us.